Thank you to those of you who will be joining us for the September session of the Wilder School's Alumni Lunch and Learn. We will be starting our session in approximately 3 minutes. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us for the September session of the Wilder School's Alumni Lunch and Learn. We will be beginning our session in 1 minute. Welcome everyone to the September Alumni Lunch and Learn for the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University. My name is James Wazalewski and I'm the Director of Development for the Wilder School at VCU. Our session today will feature our guest speaker, Dr. Stephen Moret, as well as our moderator, Dr. Elsie Harper-Anderson, for our presentation and discussion, Virginia's Economy, Where to from Here. We truly appreciate you joining us today. As a reminder, we are recording this session as well as the question and answers that are asked during this session. This includes comments in the chat as well. We are pleased to have each of you here for our session. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Susan Gooden, Dean and Professor at the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs. Dr. Gooden.
Thank you so much, James, and welcome everyone to our Lunch and Learn Alumni Series. This has been a wonderful series for us as we focus on contemporary issues, public policy issues facing the Commonwealth of Virginia and nationally. As James mentioned today, we're delighted to be focused on economic development and the economic recovery, and to have with us Dr. Moret, who is a well-respected expert on the topic. Before we get to that, I would be remiss if I didn't say a few remarks about the Wilder School, just to keep you updated on your school as alumni and as friends of the Wilder School. So we're off to a great semester. The Wilder School continues to be ranked in the top 20% of all public affairs programs nationally. And for the first time, we were ranked number 39 in public management and leadership by US News and World Report. So we are very, very pleased with all of the national recognition that the Wilder School has received for the outstanding work that our faculty, staff, and students are doing every day. I'd also like to share with you some great news that our Commonwealth poll, which is a poll that periodically surveys citizens and residents of the Commonwealth of Virginia, has been selected by CNN to be the Virginia poll for the state poll for the national election. So we're very proud of that, and we congratulate everyone involved in our Center for Public Policy on their Commonwealth poll and the work that they're doing, and the fact that our poll will be providing information nationally in terms of opinion, public opinion of the election, the 2020 fall election, presidential election. And then finally, in addition to today's event, we are preparing for another important event tomorrow, and that is our 30th anniversary event symposium. It is a full-day symposium honoring our namesake, Governor L. Douglas Wilder, the 66th governor of Virginia, continuing 30 years of history then and now. It's not too late to register for the symposium. Just go to www.wilder30.com. It is free, and we're pleased to be partnering with Virginia Union University on this event, which will include a keynote address by Governor Wilder. So that information is in your chat. But let's turn back to our focus today, which is on Virginia's economy. A lot to say there. And for that, I want to welcome and to introduce Dr. Elsie Harper-Anderson. Dr. Anderson serves as an associate professor in the Wilder School in our Urban and Regional Planning program, and she is also director of our Ph.D. program in Public Policy and Administration. Dr. Harper-Anderson is herself an expert in economic development, having focused a lot of her work on macroeconomic transformation, as well as the impact of economic forces on minority-owned businesses in urban communities. She has 2 research projects going on now that focus on the economic impact of COVID-19 on minority communities and the CARES Act. So I'm delighted to have with us Dr. Harper-Anderson to moderate today's session. Dr. Harper-Anderson.
Thank you, Dean Gooden, and thank all of you for joining us. Welcome to this important discussion on the future of the economy of Virginia. We are living in unprecedented economic times. The current pandemic has universally changed how we work and how we do business. However, the economic impact of COVID-19 is different for every city, state, country, industry, and demographic group, etc. It is critical to understand the unique challenges that the Commonwealth of Virginia faces and to strategically and innovatively employ our assets to move forward. Organizations like the Virginia Economic Development Partnership will take a lead role in figuring out a path forward for attracting companies, creating jobs, and helping our current business ecosystem adjust to the still evolving landscape. It will be critical to find solutions that are innovative and effective, and equally important that they are inclusive of the needs of all Virginians. Today, we will hear from Dr. Stephen Moret. Dr. Moret has been the president and CEO of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership since January 2017. At Virginia Economic Development Partnership, he has collaborated with state, regional, and local partners on transformational goals, including accelerating employment growth, enabling every region to grow, and returning Virginia to the top of the National Business Climate Rankings. He led Virginia's successful bid for the Amazon HQ2, designed Virginia's $1.1 billion tech talent investment program, and has launched a world-class custom workforce initiative, the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program. Dr. Moret received earned an MBA from Harvard Business School and a doctorate in higher education management from the University of Pennsylvania, where his research focused on linkages between higher education and the labor market. So please help me, join me in welcoming Dr. Moret to the Wilder School and to this important event.
Thank you, Dr. Harper-Anderson, and thank you, Dean Gooden, as well. Great to be with all of you today, and definitely want to encourage folks to think about questions and comments that you may have for me as I get into my remarks. I really look forward to those. And I just want to say before I get started how much I appreciate the great work that VCU does in terms of building talent in the Commonwealth of Virginia, in terms of contributing to the revitalization and advancement of the Richmond region, and in terms of partnering with us in our economic development efforts. I'm very, very grateful. So as I get into this, as I talk about the future, I want to start by talking a little bit about where we're at and how COVID-19 has impacted the Virginia economy. And let me first say we're all very fortunate that we're living in the Commonwealth, because for a variety of reasons, the impact of this was less on Virginia than in most other states. A couple big reasons for that. One is our high reliance on the federal government, both directly and indirectly, for our economy. And so that's been quite resilient, very few job losses there, directly or indirectly. Additionally, we have an unusually large percentage of our jobs that are in professional occupations that lend themselves to dealing with social distancing. You can sort of do those remotely. So that's the big story in terms of why we've done a bit better. But let me dig into this a little bit. Sharing a little bit about the impact here, I want to give you a sense of the scale. Great Recession, the high weekly initial unemployment claims, that's that dotted line right there. We spiked once we went to social distancing. We massively exceeded that number. We had over 100,000 initial unemployment claims per week for a period of time, but that has been coming back down. However, of course, we are seeing continued claims that until recently were above the Great Recession high. So this has been a very, very fast and very, very significant impact on the Commonwealth of Virginia, and for that matter in other states as well. If you look at it though from continued claims, so at one point in time, we had more than 1.1 million, I shouldn't say at one point in time, but cumulatively more than 1.1 million people filed for unemployment. But what's happened, and perhaps is not as obvious as this whole thing is developed, is that at the same time some folks are filing for unemployment, we have other folks that are getting called back to work. So the actual number of continued claims got up to more like 400,000 or so. So, less than half of that initial unemployment claims number in terms of what we experience at any one time. And as you can see, that number has been declining, fortunately. Nevertheless, we still have hundreds of thousands of people that are out of work that were in a better place before March. Where have been the big gaps? Obviously, the biggest impacts initially were in those industries and occupations that were most directly impacted by social distancing requirements. So most heavily hospitality, including restaurants, hotels, airlines, and so forth. Also retail trade. Those two have had the fastest and the biggest and the most durable impact since the beginning of the pandemic. The other thing that was not quite as obvious to us initially was that healthcare also has faced some big losses, although they've come back. So these are initial claims. By the way, when you look at the unknown number there, that's a big number at the bottom. We do think the general distribution of that is similar to what you see overall. So those have been really the big drivers. Likewise, if you look at things at the occupation level, food prep and servicing, biggest single category by far. You've also got sales and related, that includes a lot of the retail jobs, moving on down. As time went on, while hospitality and retail certainly continue to have the biggest effects, the companies that provide products and services to them did feel effects as well. So while the losses have been much more modest in most other industry sectors, they have been significant as time has gone on. I want to point out something in this slide. Is if you look at the median wages in the Commonwealth of Virginia for these occupations, you can see that disproportionately the biggest losses have been faced by folks that are generally lower income workers. By the way, these also typically are lower education workers, folks with less than a bachelor's degree, overwhelmingly the ones impacted, also disproportionately women and people of color as well. So when you think about the divides, the economic divides that existed prior to the pandemic, those have actually been exacerbated during the pandemic. In fact, while I don't have a slide to show this succinctly, we've gotten to the point where the vast majority, nearly all professionals, are back at work doing well. If they've got, retirement holdings in a 401k or something like that, everything's back to normal, if not better than before. You have another population of folks that are less educated, and again, disproportionately women and people of color that are in a pretty tough spot. So we've got a very stark divide in Virginia as in other states around the country. The impact of this has varied quite a bit across the Commonwealth of Virginia. Richmond has done a bit better than the state average. There's kind of two big reasons that the job losses have varied. And by the way, these are not unemployment rates. Think of this as the number of people who at one point were unemployed, but people were not necessarily unemployed at the same time. So the actual unemployment rates are much better, as I'll show you momentarily. But you'll see there is a big range across the Commonwealth. That range is driven by two big factors. One is the proportion of the economy or the employment base in each region that is tied to those high impact sectors of hospitality and retail. It turns out those vary quite a bit across the Commonwealth. So for example, hospitality much bigger on the sort of the eastern side of the Commonwealth with Virginia Beach and other tourism heavy localities. Additionally, in some cases, the smaller regions, a small number of large employers can have a disproportionately large impact on overall employment conditions. So this has kind of impacted localities and regions in a highly variable way. I mentioned that we've done better than the country overall. So again, looking at the initial unemployment rate going into the pandemic, plus initial unemployment claims as a percentage of the total workforce, you can see Virginia about 24%, far better than many of the other states around the country. US average about 31%. Many of the southern states in the 30s, 40s, or 50s, or even 60+% of people at one point faced unemployment. So Virginia has been a much better place to be, and the Richmond area has been a bit better than Virginia as a whole. Looking nationally at job losses, not surprisingly, leisure and hospitality, retail trade, big job losses from January to April, which is kind of the bottom generally in most places. Education actually held up well, but if you sort of look at education and health services together, it really was healthcare. The elective procedures were definitely impacted. They are coming back now, but they were heavily impacted as hospitals and other healthcare providers got more focused on dealing really just with the most urgent issues. The picture in Virginia, this is the same data, but just looking at the Virginia level, seasonally adjusted January to April losses. Again, you can see leisure and hospitality not that far off of half of all the job losses. Just absolutely devastating impact there. Retail trade has been a big impact in terms of loss of jobs as well. Looking at the percentage job losses from peak to trough, again, quite a variation across Virginia for the same reasons I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to dwell on this. Now let's start to think about the future and what the outlook is looking like. But first, setting the stage and the impact. So I mentioned those employment impacts. Here, the United States overall is this dark blue line. By the way, they're indexed both to 100%. So going back to January, this is looking at the change in total non-farm employment since January. U.S. overall and Virginia both went down pretty sharply. But as I mentioned earlier, the United States faced greater losses than Virginia, so you do see a bit of a gap here. But subsequently, not unlike Virginia's normal kind of pattern compared to the country overall, the impacts of the downturn are less in Virginia, but the growth coming out is also a bit less than Virginia, so it tends to balance out a bit over time. Similarly, unemployment rates, the dotted line here is the corrected unemployment rate. You can see the U.S. got far greater than Virginia at peak and is coming down. A little bit of an optical illusion here, but Virginia is actually still materially below the national unemployment rate. So we didn't feel as much of a spike, but it's coming down a bit slower. And again, that's kind of a normal kind of shape in the Commonwealth. I mentioned earlier those disparities for women and people of color. Some of those you can see here with unemployment rates even going into the downturn were different, but the impacts have also been different both at peak and then coming down. So you see the white folks in general have faced a better unemployment situation and a more rapidly improving one. Other races and ethnicities not doing as well. Again, not surprising, but in this particular context, this is particularly exacerbated by the occupational mix and educational differences that were there going into the downturn and that have been really exacerbated because of the particular nature of how this pandemic has impacted the economy. You know, again, especially impacting direct service occupations where people are highly negatively impacted by social distancing requirements that are necessary for public health. When you look at sort of a recovery in Virginia from from an industry perspective, again, you can see you can see leisure and hospitality is the biggest drop and the one that's taking the longest to come back. Let's see, there might have been a question. Oh yeah, but I do want to encourage folks, if you have any questions, feel free to add those to the chat box along the way. Welcome any comments as well. So you can see that was the biggest drop in percentage terms, also the biggest in terms of absolute numbers. It is coming back, but we think it's going to have a long road to recovery. Looking at the pace of recovery, so if we go to kind of the largest loss that each region faced and what percentage of jobs have been recovered, it's quite a range. So you have a small number of places that are either all the way back or even slightly better than where they were before, like the Eastern Shore, to other places that have only regained 20 to 30% or so of the jobs that they lost. And you would see similar types of ranges in states around the country. And I don't think this is so much a function of geography as it is of the particular industry mix and the particular set of employers that represent the dominant employment in each region of the Commonwealth. And then looking at unemployment. So you remember I told you before, total amount of jobs that were lost at some point, initial unemployment claims, much higher than these numbers when you account for the fact that some folks are going back to work and also some folks are just getting discouraged and dropping out of the labor market, let's say 3 percentage points or so. You get to a statewide unemployment rate average of around 8% in July, which I think is the latest available, but it does range quite a bit across the Commonwealth. Greater Richmond slightly higher than the state average, but a bit of a range across Virginia. Now, thinking about the future here, most economists surveyed by the Wall Street Journal, about 2/3, expect sort of a Nike swoosh sort of recovery. So we had a big drop, big rapid drop, and then a relatively slow recovery. And, excuse me, the percentage of economists in this category has been growing over time. So there's nearly a universal belief by them and us as well that we are now very much in recovery mode. The big question that there's still some debate is not just the shape, although there's largely consensus on that, the shape of recovery, but the pace of recovery. That is the thing that really is keeping me up at night, something that has really focusing our thinking is how do we help people get back to work as quickly as possible, those that are still unemployed. We're going to talk about that a bit. Let's first look at some of the national forecasts. So this is, here we're looking at US data, not Virginia, although I'll do Virginia in just a moment. The dark blue line here was the actual history. You can see the drop off. I think these are quarterly numbers. And then there's a variety of forecasts here going forward. What you will note is that there's quite a range, right? You've got IHS Markit, the Commonwealth uses for revenue forecasts. Moody's, you all probably heard of, Wells Fargo. There's a number that are out there. But in general, you can see that there's a long recovery anticipated, with most of them really all of these not expecting a full recovery even in at the end of 2021. So we are looking at the possibility of a 2 to 3 year recovery period. Someone asked if the copies of the presentation would be available. I certainly would be fine with these slides being shared. Now, looking at Virginia specifically, obviously of great interest to all of us. Here, to be clear, this is a state-specific forecast, this light blue line by Moody's. The yellow line is taking IHS Markit's national forecast by industry sector and applying that to the same employment proportions in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So you do kind of have to discount that orange line a little bit. But if you average those two, you get this sort of gray line here. And what you notice is that, we may get back, roughly half of the jobs that we initially lost by the first quarter of 2021. So in the next few months. What that means, though, is that we are going to have probably more than 200,000 Virginians who had a job going into the pandemic, who don't have a job now and will still not have a job in the first quarter of 2021. My dominant short-term interest, our dominant short-term interest at VDP is how do we help these folks get back to work as quickly as possible? One of the biggest challenges we're going to face is not just sort of this pace of recovery, but even when we get back to full employment, and I don't have the detailed slides in here, but even when we get back to 100%, the employment mix across industry sectors and occupations is going to be different. So in general, we'd expect more tech jobs, more jobs in business services, certainly more jobs in healthcare. That trend is continuing, but fewer jobs in hospitality, fewer jobs in retail. So what that means is that not only will many people not be able to go back to their previous job, tens of thousands of Virginians will not be able to go back to their previous occupation. And so there's going to be a very important reskilling set of activities that we're going to have to focus on in Virginia and, of course, across the country as well. Just to give you a little comparison to the Great Recession. Great Recession here is this light blue area, and then the dark blue line is that IHS Moody's average, if you will. So what you see is the Great Recession, we went in a lot slower and had a long, slow recovery with peak losses that were much, much smaller than the pandemic. So the pandemic really had a very, very rapid and very large cumulative effect, much bigger than the absolute bottom of the Great Recession. There was almost no comparison, particularly in the speed at which we had those losses. But in general, folks are expecting a faster recovery. So counting from the very beginning of the event, we're expected to get back much faster, at least at this point, from the current recession and pandemic employment-wise than we were coming out of the Great Recession. So that's hopefully good news. Oop, I think, let me back up here. I think I got a question or two. Let's see. Nope. Okay, so how do we get back to full strength? Obviously, some of it is simply going to be various public health measures, faster and more widely available testing. Certainly would encourage everybody on the line to sign up for the COVID Wise app if you haven't already done that. Very slick technology that Apple and Google have made available, but we need lots of people to participate in that. It's totally anonymous. The other thing, of course, is the wide distribution of vaccines. But all those things are critical. But even once those things are available, we're still going to have this sort of aggregate, mismatch between the current level, the pre-pandemic level of employment and where we are today. And so as we think about how do we close that gap, there are really four big areas that we think are big opportunities for us to focus on. One is manufacturing, reshoring, and new supply chain opportunities. One of the things that the pandemic has really made clear is that companies have to consider not just the cost of production, but risk as well, and risk related to pandemics or other events that could disrupt their global supply chain. So in general, there's an expectation there will be more manufacturing and distribution capacity placed closer to where customers actually are. That won't always mean Virginia, or for that matter, even the United States. It could mean North America with more in Mexico, more in Canada, but it should mean more opportunities for us to compete for manufacturing and supply chain opportunities. There are some critical competitive challenges that Virginia has faced in those sectors even before the pandemic. We don't have enough prepared sites. Until recently, we haven't really offered the kind of world-class custom workforce solutions that have gone a long way to helping Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Louisiana even to often outperform Virginia. We are catching up there. There's also a number of other issues with incentives and marketing efforts, but this is a really important and significant opportunity. We think we've identified all the initiatives that we need to be able to capture it. We just have to implement those. Unfortunately, some of them take money. So we're at least going to do part of it. But hopefully, as we move toward more of an economic recovery focus, there'll be a way to really invest in those things and help us to be really competitive with our other direct competitors in the South as we move toward recovery. Second big opportunity, and one that will be somewhat easier, I don't want to say easier, but somewhat easier for us to capture, is this sort of digital Virginia opportunity, broadly speaking. Just think about the tech sector in general. Virginia already is one of the strongest states in the country in this space. We're looking at opportunities in cloud computing, software development, cybersecurity, data centers, really tremendous growth opportunity, one that's getting even bigger as a result of the pandemic. This is a place where VCU has a very important role as one of the key higher education participants in the Tech Talent Investment Program, which is a $1.1 billion statewide investment in computer science education. So across Virginia, universities, public universities, and community colleges are hiring hundreds of new faculty this year and over the next couple of years to be able to roughly double the number of graduates we produce each year in computer science and computer engineering and related fields at both the bachelor's level and the master's level, and of course the feeders that go into those. We're already having a lot of success here. We're doing roughly $10 billion a year in data center investment, not just in Northern Virginia, but increasingly across Virginia. Think about Facebook, for example, is close to $2 billion now in Henrico, just outside of Richmond. Microsoft has its largest data center complex in the world in Southern Virginia in the Mecklenburg area. Just tons of great opportunities here for growth in a space where VCU can really make a big impact. In fact, one of the things that we're really hopeful for is that through the efforts of VCU and other institutions, we can really dramatically increase the number of tech graduates being produced in the Richmond region. We're way, way below Research Triangle Park, for example, which we often compete with. They're producing more than 3 times the number of tech related graduates every year. So that's a gap we really need to close. Third is a really interesting new opportunity in telework. This was a space that was already growing even prior to the pandemic, but certainly being accelerated. Of course, most people in America that are working now are working from home. It's literally the strong majority. The question is, what will be the permanence of telework? How much will people continue to do remote work after they're able to go back from a health perspective to the office? And we're doing a lot of analysis on this. It's clear that it's going to be a big growth opportunity. The question, though, is how much of it will be a hybrid model where people, let's say, work from home frequently, but they still come into the office relatively regularly, once a week, once a month kind of thing. Those hybrid workers are not going to be as big of an opportunity for Virginia because obviously you're not going to be able to move away from a job if you have to regularly go to the office. But there will be a significant percentage that will be permanent, full-time remote work. And that's where we think Virginia has a really terrific opportunity. The Richmond region and beyond, we have we're one of the best states, if not the best in America in terms of quality of life. Overall attractive cost of living with just a couple regions of exceptions in Virginia. Great weather, lots of great things to do outdoors, best public schools in the South. This is something that we're going to be able to take advantage of. The question is really, how big is it? And so that's something we're working on right now. And then finally, retooling and reskilling are unemployed. There's a large number of folks, as I mentioned, it's hard to say exactly how many, but certainly tens of thousands of Virginians who will not be able to go back to their previous occupation, not just their previous job, but they'll have to get a different line of work. This is where we think our community colleges in particular will have a very important role to play, four-year schools to some extent, but we're thinking about things like the Governor's G3 initiative, the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program, our world-class custom workforce initiative, the Fast Forward program, our Virginia Jobs Investment Program. There's a whole suite of these initiatives that are really focused on helping people reskill to get attractive new jobs. We think if Virginia could make a strong push into all four of these areas, not just with existing resources, but with new investments and policy measures, that it would go a long way to help us getting back to full strength more quickly than we would otherwise and more quickly than other states. We certainly expect a minimum of 10,000 new direct jobs per year could come out of these initiatives, more than 20,000 when you include indirect jobs. And last, I think before I get into your questions and comments, which I look forward to, I'll just say, if you think about what has happened with the pandemic, the kinds of shifts that have happened in America, the kinds of industry sectors whose prospects have been lifted by what's going on with the pandemic, and in many cases, permanent shifts that will result. I'll give you an example. The digital transformation plans of companies, many companies achieving their 5 or even 10-year goals in just a few weeks as people are really shifting toward online. These are trends that largely favor Virginia. We're a global leader in cloud computing. Just recently, for example, Microsoft announced a 1,500 job cloud computing R&D center in Northern Virginia. We are the top leader in the world in data center investment. There's nowhere in the world that is attracting more data center investment than the Commonwealth of Virginia. And certainly while Loudoun is the single biggest beneficiary, we're seeing more and more across Virginia. Autonomous systems. I know there's a lot of cool things in Silicon Valley, but you'll be amazed by how much is actually happening in the Commonwealth. For example, Torque Robotics and its tie-up with Mercedes-Benz, looking at remote large truck deliveries. We've also got underwater drones and a whole different range of autonomous systems in Virginia. E-commerce, we're one of the global leaders there, of course, with Amazon doing its HQ2 project in the Commonwealth, which, by the way, is ahead of schedule and full steam ahead, and other opportunities there. Amazon, incidentally, when we announced HQ2, Amazon had about 10,000 jobs in Virginia, 10,000 employees in Virginia at that time. Now they have close to 20,000. I mean, it's just amazing, with another 25 to 30,000 to come. So they're on track to be, if not our top employer, one of the top 3 or 4. Food and beverage processing, as people shift more from restaurants to preparing foods at home and grocery stores, it's really created a lot of new demand for food and beverage processing in Virginia. This is a place where we are one of the leading states, big opportunities there. Everything around deliveries, you know, commercial trucks like with Volvo in the New River Valley area, delivery vehicles like Morgan Olson, which is ramping up 700 new jobs in Southern Virginia with sort of last mile delivery vehicles, big opportunities there. Logistics with the Port of Virginia, which is soon to be the deepest port on the East Coast. And of course, the great investments, the historic investments that the governor and the Commonwealth are making now to take broadband to every corner of the Commonwealth. All these things really will position Virginia to strengthen our leadership position as we come out of the pandemic. So we have faced some big challenges, but there's some very constructive things that we can do to get back to full strength quicker than other states. And of course, because of the structure of our economy, we have done better than other states in terms of the extent of the job losses and unemployment here, and for that matter, the impact on state government revenue. So we do need some help from the federal government. You know, the logjam with federal support for recovery is a big negative factor for Virginia. In fact, if not for that, I think our state and localities would be in a much better place budget-wise. But even notwithstanding that, I think our outlook overall relative to the rest of the country is positive, but I do think we need to put even more energy to focus on economic recovery so we can get people back to work as quickly as possible. So with that, I'm going to, I'll stop sharing those slides and would love to respond to any questions or comments you all may have for me.
Thank you, Dr. Moret, for a very enlightening and informative presentation. Lots of information there to digest. One question I have is, you mentioned virtual work, and the current crisis has really changed the way we work and do business, particularly in terms of the prevalence of virtual work. What are the implications of that for how we approach attracting companies and for job creation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it depends. The answer to that question depends to a great extent on 2 important things that we don't know for sure right now. One is, to what extent will companies embrace full-time remote work after there's no longer a health-related reason to do so? Definitely going to be bigger than it was before, but will it be dramatically bigger, or will it be, you know, modestly bigger? Overall, it seems like the vast majority of the increase is going to be in hybrid, where people are coming into work some of the time, and so maybe not as big of an opportunity, but still significant. The second one, equally important, is what will be the location decisions of individuals. So for those folks that either want to or have the opportunity or even the requirement to work in a remote job, how will they think about where they locate? You know, when you ask about what are the implications for us, part of it is that we're going to be focused not just on companies, but focusing more on individuals, right? How do we tell the story of, you know, why Virginia is a great place to live and work for folks that could live anywhere, right? They could take their job anywhere with them. Again, hard to say how big either one of those is going to be, but in general, Virginia should benefit more than other states because we're one of the most attractive places in the country to live. I have to tell you, as having moved here, I actually lived in Virginia many years ago in Arlington, but moving here with 4 young children 3.5 years ago, I mean, it's just been wonderful for us as a family. Everyone that we have encouraged to move either to join our team at VDP or even just companies and the company, the employees and executives that work for them. It's hard to find someone that doesn't enjoy living in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we're definitely going to be a big beneficiary of that. But we've got a lot more to learn about the decisions that companies will make, and then how individuals will think about, where they're going to live. By the way, of course, many folks are just going to say, hey, I want to go back to maybe my hometown if I've got young children and want to be around parents or family. Others might want to live in proximity to where they went to college. I think a lot of folks are going to have a favored location, right, that just is already there, right? So that those may be limited ability to influence. But I do think there'll be a significant population that will kind of look across the country and say, well, if I could live anywhere, where would be the best place to live? And I think Virginia is going to get a disproportionate share of those folks.
Well, thank you. I hope so. Yeah, I teach economic development, and my lecture this week is on business location decisions. So I think I'll have to change some of the information that I've been giving. Another question that I have is, you talked about industries a lot. Which industries do you think will play the most critical role in Virginia's economic recovery? And are there new industries that you see emerging that will play a role as well?
Yeah, well, first of all, the single most important sector for our future, and I realize this is a broad label, but is the tech sector. The growth potential is just extraordinary. There's nothing that's even close to it. And it's a whole range of things from autonomous systems to software development, cybersecurity, data science, big data analytics, looking at how those things apply to different industry sectors. I mean, it's just enormous, and it's basically talent constrained. There's no state in America that has enough people with tech skills to meet the demand that's there in the market. So the more that we can keep up with that, the better. That said, there are going to be several really interesting additional newer growth targets. One example is offshore wind. We think that Virginia is likely going to be, or at least has the potential to be, the East Coast leader, the major East Coast hub for offshore wind opportunities, not just in installed offshore wind, but really in manufacturing and servicing offshore wind installations, up and down the East Coast. Another opportunity, and really one of the single most exciting opportunities in Virginia right now, is one that is a direct outcome of great scholarship and work at VCU, and that is in the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry. The work of Dr. Frank Gupton, I think he's got multiple appointments at the university, but he and the work he's done with Medicines for All and some of the related private sector ventures that are coming out of that could be potentially the single most exciting economic growth opportunity in the greater Richmond area over the next 5 to 7 years. I know that's a big thing to say, but we are talking to a bunch of leading companies that are very interested in being a part of what he and others at VCU have really helped to cultivate. So I'll be very shocked if you don't see several exciting announcements here in the next 6 to 9 months in that space. Virginia was already a significant player in the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry with Merck and many other players here, but we're talking now about opportunities in Petersburg and in Richmond proper to really create kind of a new hub for a particular type of kind of continuous flow pharmaceutical production at attractive prices, particularly for drugs that are essential to U.S. health, public health, and security. So I see that as a significant opportunity. There's of course more maritime opportunities in the Hampton Roads area, a whole range of things. But in terms of new industry sectors, those are probably the two newest ones. I guess the other thing I would give additional emphasis to is data science. As big as computer science is and the software development opportunities, data science is growing much, much faster, and I think has the potential to really leverage, again, the talent pipeline coming out of VCU and other universities in Virginia, Virginia Tech, William and Mary, George Mason, and others. That's a really important space that can be used across a whole range of different industry sectors. What is the common thread of all this? It's human capital development. If I had to pick one single thing for us to achieve in Virginia that would most enable everything else we hope for, it is for us to be America's top state for talent. Not only to be the most educated state, but to be the state that does the best job of enabling people in an inclusive way to be able to pursue their educational and economic interests.
Thank you for that. And you bring up several important points. You started out by saying technology would be critical, and then you also talked about wind and just environmental occupations in general and sectors. And so that brings an important question related to equity. So as you know, there's extreme inequality of representation of underrepresented minorities, particularly in the technology field, but also in the field of environmental organizations and companies and that sort of thing. I wrote an article about the last economic recovery, about President Obama's focus on greening the economy and using that as kind of a framework for the economic recovery, and how African Americans disproportionately were negatively impacted by the recession, but also did not receive as much of the benefit because of the focus on the green economy and their underrepresentation in that industry. So my next question is that the preliminary data already suggests that the economic impact for the pandemic has been uneven, and that African-American owned businesses have closed at much higher rates, and that African-Americans are disproportionately represented on the front lines of employment. What strategies can Virginia put in place to keep the pandemic from exacerbating the racial inequality that already exists, particularly among entrepreneurs and business owners?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say, Dr. Harper-Anderson, that I would strongly agree with your assessment of the inequality that was there before, and that it has been, and I think will continue to be exacerbated in the pandemic. Principally, in this particular instance, principally because of the occupational mix differences, right, of people of color versus, if you will, the current majority population. I personally think that, well, first of all, I think you would agree that the solution is not a single thing, right? It's a collection of different policies and shifts that need to happen. I personally believe that the single most important piece is getting education right, and in particular, getting early childhood and childcare right. Everything that comes after that, there's kind of like almost like a series of milestones or filters, if you will, that people have to sort of get through to be in the position to have access to some of the best occupations, right? Like there's a whole collection of occupations, let's say, in business, medicine, law, engineering, various things that kind of have a certain level of specific educational attainment attached to them, right? But to get to that ultimate outcome, you got to make it through the gauntlet at every other stage before. And then when you get to the end of that, like you see right now, we have a real issue in that a lot of the families that a lot of the heads of households, let's say a single mother, let's say with children, that has to work outside the home and has to physically go to her place of business, but also has young children, and her public school has gone back virtual. I mean, it's just an untenable situation, right? So I think that I don't have a simple solution in mind, but I do think in general that we have to put a lot more energy in the public sector on access to high quality and affordable childcare, access to high quality and affordable early childhood education opportunities, and then ensuring that at every step of the way that the quality of the education and the cost of the education, particularly as we get more to the higher ed side as well, is affordable, so that people can actually have access to those opportunities. I also think businesses can do more, on their end, obviously, to promote, greater diversity in their hiring practices and so forth. I think public policy has a role to play in thinking about, wage requirements and so forth. So there's a whole range of things. I'm not an expert in this, but I do think one of the positive developments of 2020 is there's been a lot more energy focused on this topic. And I think that we're going to see some real progress, not just this year, but in the next few years, as maybe the spike, if you will, may soften a little bit, but I think there's a lot of folks, myself included, that really see this as something that we want to help advance in a meaningful way, and that there's going to be sustained attention on that.
Thank you. And thank you for answering my initial questions. We're going to turn to some of the questions put into the chat box at this point. Let's see. We have a question from Dean Gooden. What are the key assumptions of the projected economic recovery timeline you shared, where you noted it is shorter than the Great Recession? For example, does it assume that availability of a vaccine?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be clear on the forecast, those are not VDP's forecasts, they're those that are put out by others. And I think depending on the organization, their assumptions would differ. So I've talked to some top thought leaders nationally who think that COVID-19 will be with us for years to come, that there really won't be a vaccine, or at least if there's a vaccine, it won't be widely adopted. Others expect it to be, widely available and for us to kind of be, at least from a public health perspective, out of this by sometime next year in 2021. So I don't know that I could give you a succinct summary of the assumptions that are there, but clearly this is, new territory. I will say there's been some past research. I can't cite the particular studies, but I do think that the one key difference in our current economy versus the Great Recession is that the economy itself was quite strong, with, at least as I think about it, I didn't see any major structural problems that were going to, that were ready to pop, if you will, as we had with the housing sector, for example, in 2008. So there's been some evidence in the past when governments have had to impose, some kind of policy measure to address the setting, that when that's removed, for example, let's say we get the vaccine and the social distancing requirements go away, that you would see a relatively rapid, pop back. So I think there's a wide range of possible shapes and paces of recovery, if you will.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I saw there was a question about Wegmans in Hanover. Many of the folks on the line may not be familiar with this. This is a new distribution center of Wegmans in Hanover County, and or at least proposed, I should say, in Hanover County, announced in Hanover County. And the question, I think, essentially is how to ensure that economic development decisions and incentives don't incentivize bad land use decisions, harming quality of life for local residents and so forth. It's actually a really good question. And I would say, I would really put the answer, and certainly this applies to Hanover, but it would not be limited to Hanover, that it's important for, well, first of all, I would say for everyone on the line to know, VDP is in the business of only attracting projects that are complementary to and fully supported by the localities that we work with and propose for those. So in the case of Hanover County, the particular location of Wegmans was already zoned for that exact type of operation. And, with the support of the public officials there, I think sometimes what happens is that, not surprisingly, not every citizen is involved in every public land use decision. But if you have, for example, if you're, let's say, in a neighborhood that's next door to, and I forget the exact zoning of Wegmans, so let me just talk more generally here. But if someone is living in a neighborhood that's, half a mile from a site that's zoned for heavy industrial, right, they should not be surprised when a heavy industrial project locates there, right? The time, I think, to think about things like zoning is before a project is attracted. I think the question is particularly relevant when, let's say, a locality or the state might want to bring in something with a use that's different than what was previously contemplated, right? But to me, I'm not a zoning expert, but in general, I would think of if an area is zoned for a particular use, that is intended to be, I think, a signal to developers or others that this is what the locality envisions going there, right? So if something is attracted that is exactly like that, I think it sort of puts everybody in a bad position to kind of change things after the fact. So I don't know what the right answer is in terms of public engagement to get folks more engaged in that, but I do think the right time for it is more, on the front end before you're really talking to actual projects, not, years after something's already been zoned for a particular purpose. And again, there may be specific details of that situation are different, but my impression is on the Wegmans item that the issue is basically that the real issue, I think, is that the folks that are proximate to where that facility would go would not just be opposed to that project, but really any project of that nature. Well, that really gets at, was it the right zoning to begin with, right? Let's see, Paula Otto says, I wonder if, given that many in the country is working from home, you may have changed your strategy and how you're marketing the Commonwealth to both prospective employers and employees. Yeah, one of the challenges, Paula, is that Virginia, until a couple of years ago, we actually had zero marketing budget. We had a good marketing budget for tourism, but we had a zero marketing budget for economic development. In fact, it was only a couple of years ago we got a modest marketing budget, and it's really not sufficient to even market Virginia fully for businesses, let alone to individuals. So one of the challenges that we've got to work through with state leaders going forward is, if we are shifting into a mode where we're not just going to be attracting companies, but also focusing more energy on attracting individuals, that's not going to be any less expensive than what we have now, right? We would need some additional tools to do that. So at the moment, we're going to stay focused on trying to deliver what we can with our sort of existing focus until we have a better sense of what the scale of the opportunity is with sort of the permanent remote work opportunity. And to the extent that starts to look pretty big, we will go to state leaders and see if there might be some more support for marketing there.
So we have time for one more question. And so we have a question from Siren. And he asked, as you mentioned, of the business growth in Virginia is in and going to be in technology, in the technology sector, specifically data sciences. There are sectors that are mostly indifferent where they locate due to possibility of teleworking. Do you believe the conventional economic development strategies focused primarily on business attraction, recruitment are going to be obsolete and replaced by place-based and lifestyle amenities to attract workforce instead? And you kind of addressed this earlier.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. First of all, I would say they were obsolete, even before this, that what we need is a more balanced approach. I would personally advocate an approach that places most of our energy on supporting the growth and competitiveness of our existing base of industry, particularly traded sector companies with growth potential. Completely embrace the notion of place-based and lifestyle amenities. Really, really important. The challenge that we face, that economic development professionals face locally, regionally, at the state level, and in every state in America, is there's a tension between the things that really will have the biggest impact and the way that success gets measured. And in general, for all the controversy around recruitment, incentives, et cetera, the allure of like a really specific transaction, whether it's HQ2 or CoStar, what have you, a company new to the region or new to the state, locating after a competitive project and signing a contract that they're going to create, X number of jobs, is very, very attractive to boards, to public leaders, and so forth. Working on things like talent pipelines and quality of life amenities and supporting existing companies that are there, it's just hard to get the same level of energy. Even, for example, I mentioned the $1 billion Tech Town Investment Program. The only way we were able to get that done was because we said we had to do something like that to make Virginia attractive to Amazon. It wasn't just for Amazon, but the fact that it would only happen if Amazon chose Virginia was the way we got something funded that we really already should have been doing. So part of the challenge here is, how do we convince our state leaders, and this is not just true of Virginia, it's a nationwide challenge, but how do we cultivate support for the things that really make the biggest difference and have a more kind of balanced, diversified approach to how we do economic development? It's a tough challenge. Great question, thank you.
It is a tough challenge, and we're going to close out our questions there. Thank you, Dr. Moret, for all of your insights and all the information you've provided us with. There's certainly much work to be done in economic development and our recovery in Virginia and across the world to address the impact. Also, there's lots of opportunity to be better, more inclusive, more innovative, and to learn from this experience so that we're ready for future downturns. We look forward to continuing engagement from leaders like yourself and from policymakers with the Wilder School as we work together to make a stronger Virginia and a better, economic and social world for everyone. So thank you again. And I'm now going to turn things back over to James Wasilewski.
I am here. Yes, so thank you so much. We thank you, Dr. Moret, Dr. Harper-Anderson, as well as Dr. Gooden for this incredible presentation and conversation. I was absolutely fascinated with some of the information, especially about the change in occupation. That was very interesting, all of it. Also, an incredible and wonderful thank you to each of our participants for today's session. We hope you'll complete the survey that will be shared after today's event. This also includes suggestions for possible future topics that you'd like us to consider for our Wilder School Alumni Lunch and Learns. A recording of this session, as I mentioned previously, will be made available in the Wilder School YouTube site, as well as our previous Alumni Lunch and Learn sessions. I will also follow up with each of our participants via email, so you will have this available to you. For our October Wilder School Alumni Lunch and Learn, we are featured, that is on Wednesday, October the 21st. And that will feature Chris Piper. And Dr. Chris Piper is the commissioner for the Virginia Department of Elections. And he will focus on the upcoming election, Virginia election information, and how the Department of Elections is working to create access to voting across the state. And before I close everything out entirely, a big thank you again to our speakers, our moderators, as well as all of our participants. As a reminder, please feel free, and we encourage you to register for the Virtual Leadership Symposium honoring L. Douglas Wilder, continuing 30 years of history then and now, which is scheduled for tomorrow on Thursday, September the 17th. Registration and event information is available at www.wilder30.com, and the event again is free to attend. This year does mark the 30th anniversary of Governor Wilder's inauguration, and this event truly does honor the legacy of L. Douglas Wilder, who is the 66th governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you so much again, everyone, and we hope you have an absolutely wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.